Hi everybody, Thursday again, so this is Think Differently Thursday. My name's Helen. The weeks roll around so quickly and really looking forward to chatting to Andy today. Hi Andy.
Hi, yeah, how you doing, Helen?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And how are
Good.
you doing?
It's a glorious sunny day and I've just checked the seeds in the greenhouse with my wife, can't claim all the credit, and they're doing what they should do. Although,
Brilliant.
yeah, hot temperatures and cold nights, they don't know whether to go up or go down, but I'm really well,
And
thank you.
it's always a good day when the sun is shining, I think.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
You bet.
So I know you a little bit, Andy, but people possibly don't. Do you want to just give us a little brief intro into who you are?
Of course. Well, people have just caught my name, hopefully. I live in Suffolk. I was a child bride. I'm happily married to Andrea. There's more on that in a minute. I've got a son called Louis, a dog called Popcorn, and two lovely cats.
Oh,
Yeah, so I'm a twin. I've got a twin sister called Naomi, an elder brother called Mike, and my mother-in-law and mother share the same name. They're both called Margaret. And yeah, I'd say I've been pretty fortunate so far. It's worked out. Yeah.
brilliant.
So
Oh, there's so much in there, Andy, that I already want to talk about. I didn't know you were a twin. How
I am. Yeah.
interesting. I always
Yeah.
think that's a whole different way of growing up because
Oh, for
you
sure.
have got somebody that has been there in a different way. I mean, I've got two brothers, but one was before and one was after. You've got someone that's always been there. That's
Yeah, she's
fascinating.
lovely. Love her to bits.
Mm.
Yeah.
And mum and mother-in-law with the same name, that has got to have had its confusing times at times.
Well, it has, but they're the two best Margarets in the world, so
Oh,
it's pretty good. Although one of them's in the process of moving house. So Andrea, her mother Margaret, she's moving house. She's downsizing. She's in her early 80s, and Andrea's just been amazing helping her navigate through that change.
right.
So yeah.
Well, my mum has just done exactly the same.
Oh wow,
82, and she has just moved house. Yeah,
gosh,
incredible. She's done really, really
is
well.
she happy where she's landed?
So happy. She's just down the road from me, and
Oh,
it's a
love that.
two-bed flat, ground floor. It's just perfect.
Good to
Absolutely
hear.
perfect. It's been such a good move. Really, really has.
That's great. Love it.
Now, Andy, you are possibly the least known staff member at the Forge, I think. So people might be going, oh, because you do a day. Is it a day? A
Yeah,
day
just about.
a
Yeah.
week
Mm,
for us.
mm.
So tell us what it
Yeah.
is that you do.
Yeah. So I'm one of the, as it were, an external contributor to the Forge. And I help brand the teaching series. And some time ago, I also rebranded the Forge. But for people who perhaps aren't familiar with the things that I do, I'm a designer by trade. I also do a bit of writing. And so around 30 years, it's hard to believe, but for 30 years, I've helped companies, businesses, individuals and authors communicate. So I'm a communication specialist. I help kind of package up stories and yeah, to encourage people to do something, change something, buy something, or become a part of something. And I love doing kind of deep dives on information and really understanding the beating heart of whatever it is that somebody commissions me to do. Repackage it, hopefully in a way that people can catch it. And yeah, so that's kind of part of what I
Great.
do. I
So
love it.
lots of our logos and images, and particularly stuff that we use in our teaching series, they're all you, aren't you? You are
That's
the
right.
face
That's right.
behind that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I work as part of the creative team. And so every month we get together and we work on packaging up an ancient story, an ancient biblical story, and packaging it up in a way that encourages people to kind of listen in or just get a bit closer. And so that's a headline, it's an image, it's how all of the constituent parts kind of want to draw you in and help people hopefully find out a bit more, and something that represents the subject that's being taught into. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
This is obviously the stuff that really energizes you and is completely your thing. And you just said about been doing this for like 30 odd years. Obviously, you don't look
Yeah.
old enough to have been doing anything for
Bless
30
you.
years. But you've always been working in the creative sector.
Do you know what I have? I mean, I started my early career in the last century. So in the early 90s, that's when I started out as a junior designer. And Yeah, boy, has it changed a lot. I think we've all witnessed the communication changes. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I started off, I was recruited by a London agency as a junior designer. And yeah, I've done work with a whole bunch of people. And we'll perhaps touch on that as our conversation evolves. But yeah, one of the things, and I think it's something you've touched on, is yeah, how much has changed in the communication channel. What I mean by that is the traditional forms of communication, be it TV, print, advertising, through to that sort of digital
And you must have
landscape.
seen a massive change, have you, from
Yeah,
print to digital? I mean, surely that is something that is year after year tipping more and more towards digital. I remember like a few years ago, I'd got a student teacher with me, and it was a real sort of moment for me that I realised that in all of the resources that we got in school and in my classroom, I'd got a walk-in cupboard just full of books and resources, and she never ever went to one of them, because for her, her go-to was the internet, and
yeah.
she worked very efficiently, and yeah, could very quickly just draw on anything digital to use within her lessons. And I thought then, this is teaching now. This is the go-to. And so you must have seen that.
I have, yeah. I mean, had I been around in the 1440s in Germany, I would have seen the advent of the Gutenberg press, and that revolutionized, communication. Then, instead of hand scribing letters, words, paragraphs, and pages, which was a tremendously labor-intensive, very expensive process. But things have changed. There is a perpetual state of change, I think, when it comes to communication. And if you think about it, from around the campfire, the stories that were told, and the only way of capturing that was by remembering those stories and then passing them down. And I think that did a number of things, not least, you'd discover who were the good storytellers. You would also discover which were the stories worth remembering
to pass on.
Yeah, that's right. But I think communication in my industry is a bit like music. Well, music is a form of communication as much as it is a form of art. And I think it's a bit like vinyl. Vinyl still exists, but streaming content has become the norm. It's convenient, it's easy to use, its deployment is straightforward, one-click purchase. You can get what you want, when you want, however you want it. So yeah, going back from the campfire, I think communication in its earliest forms were when people would press marks into, say, something like clay, or they'd scratch on the surface of wood, and that would be ancient symbols or cuneiforms, and that captured and preserved the earliest stories. So then you got the print revolution, and of course you and I have lived through the digital revolution, which is the industrial revolution of our time, really. And there's no going back from that one. The genie's out. But you mentioned about your teacher friend who kind of is less inclined to go to the cupboard of books, more inclined to go online. And I think that that you can't unlearn progression in that respect. No. But what I do think is it tends to diminish the element of curiosity and chance, because you'll be searching under a specific term, won't you? Like where's Vesuvius, or when did Vesuvius erupt, or so you tend to bring an agenda and a question, as opposed to wandering around a library. Not that anybody really wanders around a library, then that normally lays it into a section. So the other thing you said about things tipping further and further towards digital, I think that because there are so many ways to communicate, it can be really quite bewildering, and not just for my mother's age group. For me also, WhatsApp, Messenger, Instagram, email, TikTok. And I've come across a new one, Discord, which might make me sound, there you go. And I think that stuff can be missed, though. I remember a very short story. I was asked on Instagram message if I'd marry a couple. Genuinely, would I consider marrying a couple? It was Matt and Becky Banks, and it was about a year or so ago. I didn't get the message. It was on Instagram, and I missed the message. And so about 3 weeks later, I got in touch. I said, "I am Becky. I'm so sorry. I just didn't get your message. But I'd be delighted to marry you." But that suggests, I think, that you and I, and perhaps your teacher friend and others, well, which form of communication should we use to get the message across? And if it's something important to ask or say, well, maybe consider what the best form of, do you know what I mean? What the best form is.
Yeah, because I think it is overwhelming at times, isn't it? We're just absolutely bombarded with messages, and like you're saying about homing in sometimes on one thing, but I think the other thing is that one thing leads to another, doesn't it? And you've started looking for information about Vesuvius, the next thing you know, you're watching somebody's cats do
oh, you're absolutely right. 100%. You know, it is terribly distracting, actually, and you can burn time on it. And so research is a big part of what I do, and you've got to be pretty disciplined, because believe me, the squirrel on the washing line will always get far more views than anything else. Just always has. And,
so I think we do have to, I'm going to try not to sound old, but we do have to embrace the digital age, though, don't we? Again, in my teacher training, I remember the phrase, you know, kids nowadays are digital natives. This is their world. So there is no point like, oh, it used to be like this, or seeing, you know, there are dangers in it, but we have to embrace it, because as you say, there's no going back now. Do you feel like, I mean, obviously it's a lot of your world as far as work goes, but do you embrace it, or do you do the whole social media thing? You just did say that you missed quite an important message.
I did miss that.
I've forgotten that side of you, Andy. You're ordained, aren't you?
Well, I had to get ordained quite quickly, actually. Well, but that was another marriage. My cousin Alistair, I'll answer your embracing digital in a second. I was up in Northumberland a couple of years back now, and we were on holiday. And just after main course, my uncle had cooked dinner. I was taking dishes through to the kitchen, and he thrust his mobile into my line of sight. And he said, I've got Alistair. He's in Helsinki. He wants to speak to you quite urgently. And I said, okay, that's fine. And my cousin Alistair is a lovely guy. He sounds a little bit like Hugh Grant. He's quite posh.
Not a bad thing for anybody.
No, not a bad thing at all. And anyway, a long story short, he was getting married in married in Helsinki. Paperwork had been caught up, and so they had to have a shotgun wedding in Gibraltar to get married officially. But they wanted me to take the service in Helsinki, where their friends from all over the world were getting together. And would it be something I could consider doing? And it's not often you're asked to do something like that, and there's high risk, isn't there, attached? It's not something I've done before either. So anyway, I went back to the table, and they'd all finished. They were sort of putting their spoons and fork together. They finished dessert, and it's like, well, where have you been? It's like, oh, yeah, well, Alistair and Dilly have asked if I would marry them. And of course, there were some strong views at the table, which is, well, it's in 4 weeks' time. And have you done this before? And are you ordained? Very valid questions. No to most of those. Anyway, I said yes, and I did it, and it was a remarkable thing to do.
That means you can get ordained really quickly then?
You can get ordained online, but and so it literally took me about 10 minutes to find how to get ordained. But there is a slight, so I didn't need to get ordained first and foremost, because they got married in Gibraltar. So it was pure theatre. So what they wanted to do was for me to kind of front it, to take the service, and to appear to marry them, of course, in all but an official capacity. So it was an incredible weekend, in fact. So if anybody's ever asked, and listening, if anybody ever asks you, would you marry us? Say yes, despite your fears and trepidation. But I wanted to get ordained and feel, well, at least I'm slightly official in my capacity. But it was a secret until the very day. Nobody knew.
Wow. It's like that episode out of Friends, because isn't Joey, he's ordained, isn't he? He can marry people. I think
Not sure. It was an incredible thing. So I remember saying to somebody, how's your weekend? I said, I married my cousin Alistair in Helsinki. And of course, they looked at me quizzically, and I then explained, actually, I'm not in a same-sex marriage. I'm actually, my cousin Alistair had asked me. But it was one of those things, you fly over, you do this remarkable thing, and then you fly back and you wonder, actually, did it actually happen?
Yeah.
Genuinely. And then you get some
Yeah.
pictures, and so it did happen. And people were very kind with their comments. And so anyway, I remember recounting the story, much as I'm sharing it with you and others, if anybody's listening still to me. And Becky Banks, now Becky Banks, she said, well, I remember you said how much you enjoyed it. And that really prompted her and Matt's thought about asking me to do it. So anyway, I was lined up to do it. COVID changed plans, as it's changed everybody's year.
Right.
So yeah, so in a roundabout way, I haven't answered your question about embracing digital at all. But I guess the answer is yes, because in my professional capacity, when somebody says, can you help us communicate a particular ambition? It's like, well, one of the formative questions is, well, who are you trying to reach and where are they? And what are the best forms to communicate to them? Because we communicate in so many different ways, person to person, in print and digital, or we broadcast widely about this thing that we're offering the world or suggesting to the world or a particular demographic. So it needs careful thought these days, because for the reasons I mentioned, you can communicate on so many different platforms, but actually, is it the right one and where your audience, dwell? So it's a big challenge.
And of course, you have been communicating in another way recently with the podcast. That's been a new lockdown venture, hasn't it?
Do you know what it has? So just for those,
it's called Waggle Dance, isn't it?
It is. It's the Waggle Dance podcast, and this is the idea of my great friends Dave Courtine and Duncan Banks. And it was Dave's idea about a year and a half ago. We were over there for pizza. Miranda cooked this beautiful pizza, and Dave came out with a couple of bottles of beer and a notebook. And he'd had this idea. We talked about loosely. We've been running mates and friends for some time, and Dave had this brilliant idea of kind of diving deeply onto particular topics. The first series was called "The One Thing You Need to Know About," so friendship, or a whole bunch of different topics. And of course, Duncan Banks, super creative. The idea really ignited between us. So we each understood our roles. Dave being a great leader, Duncan being a preacher and a leader, and me kind of being creative and doing a deep dive. So yeah, we came up with this idea called the Waggle Dance podcast. And the idea is that Waggle Dance, for those who don't know, is it's when a bee arrives back on the hive edge, does a particular dance to share knowledge and information on where pollen is, or where water is, or where nectar is, or perhaps where the next hive might be. So it's a form of communication, the Waggle Dance. So rest assured, Dave, Duncan and I, we don't do any dancing and no waggling.
I have seen Dave dance.
Have you now? Okay. Any good? Big quiet.
It's a bit like this.
Oh, okay. That's good. A Waggle Dance.
I hope he's going to listen to this.
Yeah, he may be.
Sorry, Dave. We love you dancing.
Well, so we're now, we did season 1 and season 2 and season 3. We're looking at formulating. In fact, we're meeting outside for pizza again. I think it's tomorrow night, actually, to catch up on. It might be a manifesto. So what have we learnt in lockdown that we want to kind of continue and bring forward into life after lockdown?
Yeah.
And again, Duncan is so good at imagining what that looks like. He's such a great visionary.
He's a visionary, isn't he?
Oh, amazing. So the three of us have also kind of stayed into tight communication through this period, and it's been super tough for Dave in particular, as head of a big a big company. So that's a little bit on the Waggle Dance. So Waggle Dance,
and of course, doing something like with your friends that is really, feeds into your skills and abilities, but actually it's like with your mates. That's like the recipe for enjoyment, isn't it?
Do you know what it is? But it's also stretched us, I think. I mean, one of the things that Dave kind of pinned early on is something that stretches us both in terms of our faith, our friendship, and it's a bit like some of the things that you've asked me thus far. You've got to think about the answers, if you care about the questions, that is, to consider what you actually think about a particular topic, whether it's friendship or leadership. Yeah. So I think I had the easier job of diving into sort of culture, history, poetry, literature, on these subjects, and it was fascinating. So to share what people have discovered, and ultimately I think that's part of what great storytelling is. It's to remember something of value that helps somebody down the track I think that's part of it, you know. I really do.
Definitely. It's interesting you saying about, you know, something that stretches you as well. I think we're all going to look back on this year, and even the things that have been a bit uncomfortable or we thought we couldn't do, I think we are going to look back and think, wow, we kind of grew in that time because we did things that we perhaps thought we couldn't, or wouldn't have chosen to, but we got thrown into things. I think it's been good in many ways.
I think so. I mean, I think for maybe, I mean, just before you press the record button, you were just saying how, you know, you're surrounded by a team who supported you, encouraged you in stepping into a space that you perhaps would be less inclined to ordinarily.
Yeah.
But that takes courage, it takes commitment, and it does, you know, you got to build competencies in and around that.
Yeah.
I think for some people, it's perhaps not worked out so well for any number of reasons. So I consider myself really fortunate that I've got the friendships that I've built up over time, who I can lean into when actually it has been a bit of a struggle, or I've needed advice, and it hasn't been straightforward this last couple of years. So in that respect, you're absolutely right. I think often change can bring with it opportunity if your mindset is there and you're feeling perhaps more optimistic about possibility.
Yeah, and I think you can't, as you say, you can't undervalue those people around you, and support and encouragement as well.
For sure.
So lots of what you've talked about is creative. You are clearly a very creative soul. Is that something that you have always been, or was that something that kind of grew over time?
It's a great question. I suppose the short answer is yes, but I've been a gazer, I've been a wanderer, and I think I've always been curious and a bit reflective, but I'm not an artist. So in the, you know, what is creative? I think various people can perhaps unpack exactly what creative means, you know, whether you're a problem solver or whether you have a particular skill, like my wife, who can take water and pigment and canvas and bring things to life.
Is that one of her paintings behind you?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
she's amazing.
That's right. Oh, she is. And so I think there's a big distinction, certainly between what I do and what my wife does as an artist. For me, as a designer, the problem always comes first. What's the problem I'm trying to solve? For an artist, I think, certainly for Andrea and others, it's an expression of what they feel or what they see or what they are compelled to capture. So it's less about fulfilling a brief, although you get more commercial artists who perhaps paint in a particular style that earns them money. You know, it's so it's a union of two. But so I think I'm creative insofar as I connect things and help people make sense of things that others might see as well. So I would say short answer is yes, I'm on the spectrum, and in more ways than one, perhaps some might say. I'm not sure where I am on that spectrum, and it probably varies. So did you, in growing up, did you kind of find like-minded people, or did you think, did it kind of set you apart as a child, this kind of design, creative kind of side to you? I mean, was school a good experience? There's a couple of questions in there. I'll start off with the easy one. Did creativity set me apart as a child? No.
Okay.
No, it didn't. Creativity didn't set me apart because I think I was, and I don't think I'm being, I was decidedly average, actually. Okay. I think as a child, put me in the yet to develop, could do better, needs to concentrate more category. I still am. But I think that the world then and the world now, it overawed me. It still does, in the sense that the complexity of it, the interconnectedness, how it works, the interplay and fragility of it. I can't think about that too deeply because it's rather overwhelming. It's a remarkable world, the one that we live in. I really do think that. I wasn't a child prodigy. I didn't draw or paint like a master or write poetry or prose. In fact, my mother reminds me from time to time that I wasn't very good at maths and English. And she was right. I wasn't, because I didn't concentrate. I wasn't interested in Janet and John, genuinely, you know, write something
Janet
else.
And John, do you remember them?
Well, I don't really, but yes, I do.
Was it? Who were the Ladybird books? Who were they? Peter and
Yeah,
Jane. Peter and
yeah,
Jane.
okay. So I was a late developer, and I think I still am a late developer. So when it came to creativity, I searched for a while, like we all do. And actually, I did then what I do now, which is I connected things. And I came of age probably in the mid-'80s, the advent of the world of brand in all its forms. That caught me, it intrigued me, I bought into it, and yeah, I could relate to it. So in answer to your second question, how was school? It filled time, I think. I didn't learn much, and I think that was for a number of reasons. I wasn't really interested in what was being taught, truth be told. The demographics of a supermarket, and one of the questions that, or one of the themes, it was looking at the demographics of people who visit a supermarket on a given week, and you know the numbers, and it's like I was more interested looking out of the classroom window and seeing how a nest was being constructed by a bird. It's true.
Yeah.
So I wasn't engaged really at school. It wasn't a straightforward school. It was a comprehensive school. It was more, it was more about survival actually, but not in a kind of a primeval way. It was more, it wasn't really, it didn't work so much for me, but I love learning latterly. It just, the school.
I think you'd
work.
probably like school more now as well, because I think we have learnt to be more creative. We talk about a creative curriculum. We talk about immersive classrooms, and I think you'd enjoy school more now, because I think we're tapping into the fact that kids learn in different ways, and actually if they're experiencing, they're much more likely to learn. I think teaching has probably improved a lot.
I don't think I was as straightforward. I think I would have been a frustrating student. Unlike, for instance, Shakespeare. There's a great TED talk. I forget this. I should remember his name. It's all about creativity in school. It's talking about how Shakespeare must have been an annoying child to have in the classroom because he was so good. But I think I wasn't straightforward. I think I lacked. I was easily distracted. I mean, talk about young people, actually, and adults being easily distracted in the digital world. Well, I was just distracted in the world. I just found other things caught my interest. Whether it was the spiders, but nature caught me big time. Whereas demographics of people who visited supermarkets, less interested in that.
Absolutely.
But, I think you're right.
You talked about being like awed by the fragility of the world. I tend to think that a career in something creative can be quite a fragile career as well. People trying to really make their way in it. But clearly your writing and your designing have brought you success, whatever success is.
How do you monetize creativity in some respects? And that's not language I would have even understood in my younger years. And you're right, it's highly competitive in the creative sector. And I think I've been very lucky. I've been very fortunate. So one of the things, just before I unpack that, I really believe in the value of a trusted relational network of highly competent individuals. So a trusted network of highly competent individuals, people that you meet along the journey who are just really good, really committed, and perhaps a bit humble, but people who you meet and you think, actually, I want to learn from them. I want to work with them. I want to work for them. And perhaps, I don't collect people. I really don't. But I like to remember the values and the things I can learn from them, to inculcate, to absorb, and perhaps replicate as well. So a couple of things on fragility in the creative sector. I think you've got to work really hard. You've got to learn to take a few knocks. Try not to take things personally too much, but work hard on your competencies and be resolute and committed on self-improvement. And I think those two things are going to, if you work really hard and you're on those competencies, it's going to give you a chance, actually. But I've also chosen, this is to walk over a few thresholds in my time as well, a trust leap of sorts, several. I went on a walk yesterday with Andrea and Trevor Waldock and Jane Beaumont. And I had a fascinating conversation with Trevor, such a insightful, wise guy. And we were talking actually about thresholds and transformation. And here's the thing, we stopped sort of at the end of the walk, and it was by a church. We were in a churchyard. Trevor was talking to me. I was talking, just sharing these stories about transformation. And right there was somebody's grave, great big gravestone, somebody's grave. And it seemed, do you know what? When you're talking about some of the tougher things in life, like stepping over thresholds, the need to dig deep or be courageous, I was reminded there and then that actually somebody's grave, surrounded by these people, life is short. So do the best damn job you can with what you've got. Be courageous with whatever you decide to kind of lean into. If it's in the creative sector, then just be courageous in your sector, in whatever line that you do. So, and it's tough, you know, it's not going to be straightforward, but enjoy the breaks when they happen. And when you're in the flow, enjoy that as well. So the idea of writing and designing, bringing success, that's a toughie actually, because I think it's a funny thing, a fickle thing, money, sales, or recognition or awards. Well, I've managed to get a bit of that along the journey. But a very good friend of mine, Simon Coop, I remember I entered an international competition with a book that I produced, spent far too long on this project, but thought it was the best thing I'd ever done, you know, and it didn't place, and I didn't get the awards, you know, didn't get the baubles. And he simply said to me, your award was finishing what you started, actually. So at least be thankful for that, because that's something in and of itself. So yeah, success, how do we measure that? How do we measure it? Well, there's any number of ways of measuring that.
Yeah, and probably it's whatever it is to you personally as well, isn't it? Because I think other people's perspective can sometimes put pressure on us, but actually it is about often deciding yourself what your goal is. And yeah, I think sometimes we arrive at that goal and nobody else might know, but we feel like, yeah, we've achieved what we wanted to achieve here.
Very much so. I think also to learn where we've been so that it shapes us moving forward as individuals. So my second book, I didn't enter the competition, in fact, because actually that wasn't really what it was about. It's about, you know, so it changed slightly, I think, as well. But I also think it's about, gosh, being realistic as well with the ambition and the end game. That's not, you know, dare to dream, you know, shoot for the stars, but you might just end up on the moon. Well, that's okay. It's not a bad place to get a good vantage point from. But to be realistic, but not at the cost of daring to dream, I think would be one suggestion anyway. Yeah.
So looking at your career, you went from, you said earlier, junior designer to creative director, but then at some point you decided to go it alone and work independently. So what was around that sort of decision for you? Because that's another one of those big leaps, isn't it, really, with less security around it? I mean, how did you arrive at that decision?
Gosh, do you know, how long have you got? I mean, first of all, legitimately, I think there's probably a condensed version to that and a short. So I'll try and be short. I think it's not trying to over curate your future. You know, I'm a planner by trade. We plan and try and create a landscape in support of particular outcomes for communication. And I opened up with the ambition of what's the purpose of this piece of communication, to get people to buy into it, to literally purchase it or buy into an idea or contribute in some capacity. So I think in answer to your question, you know, what was the decision that meant I left mainstream safety of a very secure job that I'd worked at very hard, 20 years. Well, actually, it was about family and a promise that, it was a promise that Andrew and I had promised one another, that if blessed with a family, that we would kind of dial down our professional careers, parent together, look to raise, as it turned out, our son in an equitable, shared way, something that we could do together, enjoy together, without the added pressure of me commuting for 4 hours a day into London. And I know many people don't have that choice and that option. Well, we were very fortunate. Andrea sold her design business at the back end of the 90s. And what that enabled us to do was effectively escape to the country, you know, watch those programs and say,
get out the rat race.
Yeah. Although not everybody fully understood that. My father thought, well, hang on a minute, you're at the top of your game. You're really well paid. Why are you doing it? You know, that's a risky thing. And he was right. It is. Nevertheless, I continued to work for the agency through to 2004, but I did call time on my design career. So I thought, so I'll try and condense it. So we researched home-based businesses. We set up an award-winning self-cater business. We started a small plants nursery, and then a garden giftware, tools and accessories shop in a converted windmill. So it kind of changed a few things. I remember a wonderful lady I've worked with and stayed in touch with, a writer and author, editor. She called me Renaissance man because I went from computers to compost literally overnight. And I first of all had to look up what she meant. but then I kind of thought, it's this reinvention. I'd never imagined it would roll that way. So, but here's the thing. I ended up in that windmill under some stairs with a computer. And guess what? I continued to design. Yeah. In fact, I ended up rebranding the Forge Community Church covertly. But I've mentioned Susie Powling. She was instrumental actually in that period of change. This is how it changed, in answer to your question, by going independently. Susie came round to our house. We lived in an old Suffolk hall house, a medieval hall house, built in 1450. And we were part of this invitation to view thing. Sounds quite quaint. People come over, slice of cake, cup of tea, a house tour. And, it sounds quite unusual. It's an unusual thing to do, to show people around your house. Well, it was an old house. Anyway, Susie hung back with her husband at the time, Jerome. And she'd noticed two things. First of all, she said, the house is beautiful. Who's the creative one? So I think I was holding a tray with empty teacups. I said, well, that'll be my wife. And she said something like, well, what do you do then? I was like, I'm a designer. Well, I used to be a designer. She said, can I see your book? Anyway, my book being my portfolio of work. And she was working at the time for a government agency, and she was looking for a creative partner to help with corporate reporting. She introduced me to a Bournemouth-based agency, and suddenly I was back in the game. I was back in the, as a creative director, providing insights and being paid to do what I used to do. And I really enjoyed it. And it was at a time actually when it really worked for us as a family. I'd been off work for perhaps 4 or 5 years. It's amazing how quickly you burn through the cash, by the way. If anybody's got any ideas, budget really carefully. Perhaps, cut a few cards up so you've just got one. Anyway, so I worked with Susie then independently. And this is really how it ignited. So I went from career designer to running a shop with Andrea, to then back into the game. And I then set up, as it were, independently, working in partnership with Susie. I did the composition, she did the words. And we had a very rich time. I learned such a lot from her, continued to learn a lot from her. That's when I won a tender for a government agency who was setting up called the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, a government agency who were tasked with supporting emerging democracies. That's when it ignited. So it was risky, but actually, truth be told, I'd never stood alone. I'd never done what I did alone. I'd always had a team. I'd always worked with Andrea, and I'd never knew really, how far can I get in this thing? And, I was ambitious, and I still am ambitious, although it's changed a bit. And so I won this tender to do a startup brand for this government initiative, worked with Susie, worked in collaboration with people from Thomson Reuters Foundation, the International Bar Foundation, and I'll land on this one story and then we'll move on because it's, I don't want to kind of go too deeply into this, but I remember I was standing in a panel chamber in the Palace of Westminster about to present to a table full of people, and I was 5 minutes away from presenting, literally walking through the door, another threshold, walking through a door, presenting the ideas. And as you might imagine, I said a prayer You do. I pray that I don't faint when I present, because it's an unusual place to stand, with a bunch of people who are hugely experienced. And something extraordinary happened. Actually, two things happened. One, I didn't faint, but the second one was I got this distinct message that said, Andy, mate, you've done really well. This is it. I want you to call time on it. So once you presented and delivered this project, back to what you promised. So Susie wasn't best pleased with me because I was handing out business cards and I could have grown, it could have expanded, but I had to get back onto the original plan, the promise that Andrea and I had made to one another. And so that was 2009, 10, something like that. That's when I dialed down for the second time.
It's really interesting. Yeah, that's quite a journey. And you've talked there about several things that you've been involved with, and books that you've written, and I know you've worked with lots of organisations and charities. If you had if there was something that really stood out in your mind as one of your favourite projects you've worked on, can you pick one?
Yeah, I guess there's probably two. I think, and it's scalable. The Westminster Foundation for Democracy was huge. In fact, working with these people to support emerging democracies, it was a real honor and a privilege, I think, and to kind of add gravity to that. Grand Design, everybody knows Grand Design. Kevin MacLeod, he interviews people, and I like him a lot. He's a bit cheeky with some of the questions he asks. I remember him asking a builder.
He's so honest as well, isn't he? Really honest.
He is. I love that. He asked the questions that you want to ask, actually. And I remember he asked a builder, he said, so, how's it going? And he was quite lightweight about it. And I like that. He goes light and heavy, quite, in a blink. You've got to be careful the way you answer. And this builder said to Kevin MacLeod, he said, do you know what, Kevin? It's a real privilege and it's a real honor to be asked to build somebody's house, because they might only build one house in their lifetime. It's all of their savings and they're piling into this. So you're not just building a house, you're building a dream that they've thought about for an awful long time. So it's a bit of an honor to do that. So I want to take that seriously and do the best job I can. And Kevin MacLeod, I remember, he had nowhere to go. He couldn't take the mickey out of it. He couldn't make light of it. He just said, yeah, I get that. Yeah. Good job. And I think for me as a designer, when I'm commissioned certain things, I remember, whether it's for a government agency or for an author, this might be the only book that they ever write and produce. Honor the author, honor the content to entice the viewer and bring your best to it. I really mean that. So I think for for standout projects, it would be the corporate reporting and the new initiative in fact, it was for the Ukraine, the first one. It was a program of emerging democracies, one of which was the Ukraine, which latterly got invaded. So anyway, a campaign for innocent smoothies. I remember working on that. That was good fun. Employee retention for BP. Did some great work for BP in the UK and globally. So yeah, that's probably a little bit.
And obviously the Forge as well, obviously.
It's up there, mate. It's up there.
Yeah, well, actually, didn't need mentioning, just like.
Well, it does. You see, actually, when it comes to clients, they don't come much bigger than God, do they?
Well, there you go.
So you've got to bring your best there, because he knows. He knows when you're doing a what's the word? When you're not bringing your best, put it that way. He knows. That's for sure.
And you've mentioned Andrea, your wife, a lot. So did you meet through work? Was that your original introduction to each other? Yeah.
Yeah, she recruited me. Yeah, back in '92, junior designer. And I didn't know I was also interviewing as a husband. But then again,
you sold yourself very well.
Very much. Yeah, but how things change. Unexpected things happen. Yeah. And that was very unexpected. But yeah, so.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we've worked together for a long time. Thank you. Thank you.
She's a brilliant artist. Every so often I see some of her work, and she's absolutely incredible. So there's a lot of creativity in and around your home, isn't there? I can see your home looking beautiful behind you there. And what about Louis? Is he your son? Is he creative?
Yeah. Well, this is like an outbuilding, so I'm in the studio. So it's a bit blokey. It's a bit man cavey in here.
Looks very neat and tidy.
Yeah, order. Hold on. You're right. So the question is, Louis creative? I would say he's a great problem solver. I also think that he's a writer in the making. But I also think he's very early on in his kind of journey as well. But he's an apprentice agricultural engineer now, working at a local company on the John Deere side. So yeah, I think he is, but not in the conventional sense. But that's when we kind of, as it were, come back to what is creativity. You know, actually, I think it's much more than just problem solving, of course, or making beautiful marks on a canvas or answering a particular brief. It's manifestly broader than that.
Definitely. And who has the biggest input in your home then? I bet the rest of your home is absolutely beautiful. Is it Andrea, or is it a pair of you together?
I would say, without question, Andrea's talents extend way beyond the canvas. She's a brilliant interior designer. She's a wonderful cook. So the Stewart boys, we happen to do rather well. She started pottery, I think last year, or maybe the year before. So for sure, I mean, do you know what? Our marriage is like a collaboration. That makes it sound a bit boxed in, but we share everything. But when it comes to interiors, I'm really happy to kind of go with a recommendation on that front. Yeah, she's brilliant. She's so good.
I think that's quite typically male and female as well, isn't it, in the home?
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
And Andy, I know that you're a Christian and a part of our church at the Forge, and we often talk about the different ways that people connect with God. And so that might be out on a walk, out in the countryside, maybe through music for a lot of people, reading the Bible or other literature for other people. So it would be an easy assumption to assume that it's something creative that enables you to connect best with God, but that might not be right. How would you say, you know, when are you in your best place of connecting with God?
Gosh, it's a broad question. I think connect is a funny old word, isn't it? To connect, but I know what you mean. I think for me, connection, actually with anything, it's about time and attention. And it's way beyond just the transactional, what I can get out of this or what's in it for me in a world of transactions. So I just want to swipe that, as it were, out. So to connect, I think, is about space. It's about nature for sure. You know, the magnificence of nature, when you suddenly feel the scale of that, and not just the majesty of it, the intimacy of it as well. So for me to connect, I think probably I'm not that much different to anybody else, in the sense that to be intentional about the things I read or watch or listen to, but perhaps to be disciplined about that, to be quiet, the opposite of what I've done for the last half an hour or so. But understandably, this is about you unpacking, you know, the story.
It would be a strange little chat if you weren't talking. We wouldn't be learning much.
Yeah, if we're just sitting there like that, it'd be like that. Yeah. It'd be quite artistic though, don't you think? Well, no, maybe not.
We'd draw our own conclusions.
Yeah, you could. So music, scripture, leaning into authors, speakers, teachers, Rob Bell, Andy Stanley, as well as TED Talks and other, as it were, secular creative sources. Connecting to others, there you go, through relationship, that's for sure. Meeting with like-minded people who want to wrestle with the light and the heavy, like with you know, with Trevor Waldock over a grave, or with Duncan and Dave over pizza, or actually with you over Zoom, or for that matter, you know, Andrew over a cup of tea in the bed as we listen to a Bible plan. I think it's being flexible and perhaps open to being what's the word? Playful. We learn, you know, I learn in the play elements.
I think you've just kind of created a phrase in my mind, almost about being flexible but disciplined. That's kind of possibly a good approach to it. Great. I think another thing we talk about is not wanting to put faith or God into a box, not wanting to compartmentalize our faith, but we really would advocate faith and relationship with God being a thread that runs through all of life. I think it's easier said than done, if I'm honest. Is it something you think you managed to achieve?
Do you know, again, it's a great question. It's a difficult one to answer. So I want to do another very short story. I think guys, no, I won't talk about guys, too general. I think I can compartmentalize. So historically, I can do that. To be the same authentic individual, regardless of my context, application, or the place I find myself, is really important to me now. To, as it were, pin my colors to the mast, to not compromise the values or beliefs I have, to not be so quiet and compliant even, but to actually carefully voice opinion about faith and belief when there's an opportunity to do so. I think that's really important. When my father died, at his funeral, there was a moment actually that I'll never forget. There were several, but this one particular moment. At the end of his church service, and the church was rammed. My dad was, he had a strong faith. You collect at the back and you start talking to people as you do. His oldest friend, a guy called Nick, came up to me. He was a jazz musician, a commercial artist as well, taught at Swindon College of Art. He came up to me and he said, can you give me a lift to the station? First thing he said, can you give me a lift to the station? And I was like, yeah, of course I can give you a lift to the station. And we got into the car, and there were people that I wanted to speak to that I didn't get the chance to, because I gave Nick a lift to the station. But it was a very important lift because Nick was confused. Nick was upset, and Nick was annoyed because the man that he'd heard being talked about at that church service was not the man that he recognized or knew as a friend. It wasn't the man that he'd grew up with and plays in the jazz club. It wasn't a man that he'd shared a pint with. It was somebody else. It was a guy who had a strong faith. He had a belief, an unswerving belief. In fact, he was a teraplegic for the last 6 months of his life. But he shone tremendously bright. So in that car on that way to the train station with Nick, I was reminded by one thing, that my father hadn't shared what he believed and who he was with Nick. And he'd met him a number of times at these reunions. You know, we've done a lot of that on Zoom, haven't we? Well, he did that a lot in person up in Newcastle. So Nick didn't recognize my dad and who was being spoken about, because my dad had perhaps chosen not to and compartmentalized his faith. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to disappoint anybody, let alone miss an opportunity to share a story about what I believe and why, that might just improve and help somebody else understand and live a life that is makes a bit more sense. It's quite difficult to put into words, and I'm kind of stumbling a little bit because it's also very emotive. But when I drove back on my own, everybody had gone. The church was empty except for just a few members of family. But Nick's stories remain. Nick's story taught me that actually tell the story that you believe, share your faith and belief in the worlds that you orbit and orientate and move, because Nick actually could well have stayed and told a different story himself.
And so we never know, do we, whether we're the only person that the Nicks of the world are going to hear it from. We never know.
You're absolutely right. You know, I mean, we talk a lot about, you know, creating church for the unchurched, and that's quite a complex piece of language if you think about that. But to actually just tell a story that somebody hasn't heard, that's a good news story about living a life in all its fullness. Well, how about that? You know, what does that mean? And unpack that. Well, it might just help people wrestle and fight and be resilient and meet people where they're at. So, you know, and answer your question about faith and forge and not compartmentalizing, wherever you find yourself, if there's and if you can authentically weave a true story that you believe into the narrative that you think is going to help somebody down the track, do it. Yeah.
I think it's been obviously a difficult year for everybody, and we haven't been able to meet as church. And I think for some people, removing Sunday morning has had massive impact on their faith. And I think it's, in a sense, it's shone a light on the real need to be responsible for our own spiritual growth and our own disciplines. How have you managed during this year? What's been important to you in your faith journey this year? I mean, you've talked about having folk around you that are good for you. Are there things that you've had to actively put in place to ensure that you kind of have maintained your relationship with God?
Yeah, I think so. Safeguarding's part of it, and you've already nailed it, Helen. Ownership of my own faith journey. You know, faith isn't new to me. And that can cause a little bit of laziness, I think. You know, it's less familiar now than it once was, and yet it's more important now than it's ever been, you know, simply put. So you're right, a year of disconnection, loss of routine, loss of purpose, loss of rhythm. And so what's been important to me in the faith journey? Well, to remain on track, to trust, to have faith. Well, practically, what does that mean? And I think to equip and not flounder. There's been times when I've floundered, for sure. To not just survive, but thrive. And that all sounds quite catchy, doesn't it? But I think the practical things that I've put in place is to continue to lean into learning, to look at the various resources that are available. But of course, that's broadened out. It really has. Well, I've read for a long time, so guidance from commentaries on faith and belief, and that might be books, as well as, you know, not just from Christian authors, but, you know, Jordan Peterson or Michael J. Sandel or Matthew McConaughey, great book on called Green Lights. Don't know if you've seen it. Bible plans, you know, doing a Bible plan in the morning. I mean, it's terribly traditional, but also really important. It orientates you at the front of the day and the back of the day. You sometimes get a little reminder, which is, you know, that thing you said this morning, how'd you get on with it? You know, did it work? Did you remember it? So healthy practices and discipline is important. But do you know what, Helen, truth be told, I have felt distance that's kind of come between me and the church that, you know, I've been a part of, inevitably, because of the change. And teaching for me is really significant, much more so, I think, than any other aspect of worship, be it music or, you know, in-person worship together. And I've discovered things on digital. There are some fantastic resources available, you know, they're really, really good. And that's not just things, you know, North Point resources, Andy Stanley, as well as TED Talks and others. So I think, if it's important to you as an individual, then you'll make time for it, I think. And so for me, I've made time for it. I've been I'm quite a disciplined sort of guy anyway. And it's helped me to grow and evolve and develop. It's also helped me, and I think you've touched on this, Helen, by saying Sunday morning isn't just about your local church or the things that you can get and receive from your local church. There's a world of resource out there. Just be careful what you Google, though. You know,
I think we could all feel like we, you know, have tapped into lots of other churches and things that are going on in a sense that we haven't done before. I think,
it's a wonderful thing, because actually, you know, change. You know, I remember saying years ago to somebody, it's amazing how if you put yourself in a place of change, guess what happens? Change happens, and that can be a remarkable thing, as well as a slightly unnerving thing, but on, you know, the continuous cycle and journey of that. So,
So you talked about, you said faith's not new to me, and you talked about your dad's faith. So does that mean you grew up in a faith-based family? It's always been part of life?
Yeah, I had, yeah. So super classic, Church of England, choir boy, Cub Scout, and so yeah, it was always ever present. Sunday was actually, was it football or rugby in church? You know, it was that kind of rotation. In fact, I thought it was weird when I kind of, you know, when you leave the family unit or go to college, and it's like people, well, they don't go to church, they don't play football or rugby. It's like,
what do you do?
Yeah, what do you do? Actually, ballroom dancing, or you know, they'll do something else. So yeah, that was my backdrop was quite conventional in that respect. Yeah.
And at some point, do you recall a time where you kind of definitely thought, right, I'm going to make this my own, I'm going to nail my colours to the mast and become a Christian? Or was that something that you just grew into and it evolved over time?
Yeah, so I can be very specific. so I've mentioned I went to a comprehensive school in Birmingham, visited by some American evangelicals who were professional basketball players. Well, instantly you're looking up and you're like in awe, aren't you? They came with a singular message, and that message was something that caught me at age 16. I love sport, and I was fortunate that I was, naturally gifted at sports. So, of course, these guys caught me from the get-go. So age 16 in McDonald's, that's when I was converted. Yeah, that's when I thought, you know what, I'm in. So never look back. Never look back.
Fantastic. And something else that people might not know about you, and I don't think we've even mentioned it in this conversation, is that you are a black belt in martial arts.
I am.
Now, I know nothing about this world at all, except that I do know that black belt is like top, isn't it? And so presumably this is something that you've been involved in and worked towards for a long time. Is this part of your life for a long time?
I have, yeah. Love sport, and I played a lot of rugby, and I even had a trial for England in my youth. So I've loved sport. And I first tried out martial arts when I was 18, karate, graded under Sensei Frank Brennan, who's now, was he 8th Dan, I think, on the technical team under Karate Union Great Britain. So you're right, martial arts, it has been a huge part. Yeah, I think for the last, in particular, the last kind of 10, 12 years, which is when, because there was a big pause. I then, I did a taste and see with Louis, aged 6. It's a good thing, I think, when you've got a young child, you think, well, martial arts, I want them to build resilience and have the ability to look after themselves. And that's a good thing, I think, to look after yourself, or at least, build confidence and such like. So anyway, I joined him. I was in my late 30s. And I also thought, I must admit, I don't think I say this to many people, last chance saloon for me. Have I got the opportunity to kind of hit the black belt? As you say, it's it's the top. Well, actually, it turns out it's actually just the start. There are many levels above black belt. So I come, I'm kind of starting out 10 years in, just a bit over. But anyway, so I graded black belt back in 2018, and in the Korean martial art called Kuksul 1, which is a Korean martial art developed in the early 50s.
Right.
So yeah, that's.
So I really don't know. And I think there's lots of martial arts, aren't there? I don't.
There are.
Honestly, my knowledge is like Hong Kong Fooey and that. Do you remember that series? I'd have been like a teenager. My older brother loved it. Monkey.
I do with Tripitaka. That was a journey. I used to watch it as well. Tripitaka was she was the Buddhist monk who was on a journey. You never knew what the journey was about.
Yeah, they were all traveling one behind the other, weren't they? Yeah, I never
Monkey,
even understood
Sandy, and
the
I can't remember the
program.
other one.
But you are trying to unpack it all a little, aren't you? Because I know you've written a book, and isn't it about kind of dispelling some of the myths about martial arts? Tell us about that.
It is. Again, if people are listening, well, it's a shorter answer. My lockdown project was to turn to a question that has been with me for some years. So I've been thinking about this for years, and I worked on it for the best part of a year. The why behind martial arts. So many people, what's the point in, in a world where technology, we talk about advancements of digital communication. Well, what use is martial arts in a world with guns and knives, for instance? It's a legitimate point, isn't it? Well, it turns out that martial arts is more about self-improvement than it is about self-defense in the main, although there are times legitimately when you need to deploy it in order to de-escalate a situation or control a situation. So I decided to turn to that question of the why behind martial arts beyond the YouTube and Hollywood notions of what people generally believe. And it was also a refuge project, right? Because this time last year, my commercial work had dialed down, and I had time, which is a good thing and not such a good thing. So anyway, I started to write, and in fact, there is a chapter dedicated to Hong Kong Fooey, as there is, truthfully, honestly, because in the 70s, that was the ascent. I won't get too kind of entrenched in the story, but it is available to pre-order on my website, www.unbelievableBook.uk. Anyway, But there's also, we talk about the lighter side, the Hong Kong Fooey, which is a parody, of martial arts. He was a buffoon, it was his sidekick cat called Spot who saved the day. Hong Kong Fooey. Yeah, do you remember Spot?
Oh,
anyway,
he used to mess up all the time, but he always thought that he'd done it. He always took the credit, didn't he?
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah. So Spot always, got the bad guy in the end. But there's a very serious angle to it as well. And so there's a chapter that buttresses the Hong Kong Fooey spread, which is called Martial Arts Saved My Life. And back in 2017, when I did grade for Black Belt, I got alongside a fifth Dan master and just asked him, as you do, which is, so what are you doing? Why are you here? He was grading from fifth Dan master. And he started to share a story. You know, it is with strangers, sometimes it just comes out, doesn't it? And he shared this story about how he'd been in a particularly difficult place, relationship tanking, a bit of a drink problem, and his martial arts family were his refuge. They were the people who wrapped themselves around his situation and his circumstance and supported him. And it was a compelling story that I never forgot. And so I got back in touch and said, do you remember me? And he didn't. But he did remember the story that he told some bloke in 2017. And I said, would you mind if I included it? I'm writing a story about martial arts. And he said, I'll think about it. And he eventually said yes, because his story is a compelling story of hope, of courage, of support and faith. And I just, and so it's the book that I've written is titled Why Everything You Know About Martial Arts is Wrong, which is a terribly presumptuous title because, there's a lot of people who know a lot more about martial arts than I do, but nevertheless, it piques an interest, if you know what I mean.
And we talked about not wanting to compartmentalize faith. And so, does faith and belief in God have a place in martial arts as well?
Maybe, yeah. I think I can only share my personal experience on that, but on the basis that I think faith and belief is everywhere because God is everywhere. So from churches to dojangs to training halls, I think I've seen and witnessed, and no doubt yourself, Helen, in the various places that you've, been and walked, is there's broken people and anxious people, frightened people everywhere, or, in all orbs of life. And I think so for me to have reconnected with those stories and written about that in the book, include, it's not my book, it's our book. It's a shared collection of stories. So for many people, in answer to your question, I think, does faith and belief in God have a place in martial arts? Well, I think for many people, martial arts is a way of life, a place of refuge and acceptance and stability and consistency, and a place that won't necessarily judge them, although people are tested. And I think that's important, in martial arts, less so in church, perhaps. People are tested, you've got a grade, haven't you? You've got to go toe to toe occasionally. And that helps us deal, I think, with one thing, performance anxiety. And life can be a performing anxiety extended, can't it? Where you've got to stand up and take a wedding or stand up and talk to somebody about something you feel quite passionately about. So the thing that's interesting about martial arts is we all wear the same uniform. So it normalizes and standardizes us. Although there's a clear hierarchy, it brings us all under one banner by a shared unity in that sense. So as a Christian, I think the idea of church is a place, an opportunity to commune with others outside. That's a place to commune with those who believe what we believe, but for us to move in spaces and places where people have yet to hear the good news, for want of another term, then to do that sensitively and do that carefully and authentically is a rare opportunity, or rather you should make it more of an opportunity. So and as a teacher, Helen, yourself, you no doubt have opportunities to meet with and speak about faith and belief and God in the place that you find yourself.
I guess it's like mindset as well, isn't it? Just choosing that we're going to bring God into, whether it be martial arts or walking with a friend or whatever we choose to do that fills life, just allowing God to be part of it as well.
I think so. It's an invitation. It's invitational in that respect. And I think for me, faith is It's something that you hope that you have, and you hope to hold it as well, to build it. And through this season, this kind of fast forward season of lockdown, to foster it and grow it. And I think that one of the things that certainly for me, martial arts and combat does, when you go toe to toe with somebody, nothing else matters. Not the past, not the future, just that moment. And I think that to pit your wits and skills against an opponent forges courage and fortitude and commitment, because otherwise you get a slap or a straight right through your guard, you know, and we could all do with a straight right through the guard sometimes, just to kind of wake us up. And I think that's what martial art does. It brings things very vividly into focus, for me anyway. You know, when you hit the floor and you have to stand up, it's life in miniature in many ways, I think. And it irons me out, much like my faith, it irons me out, and it helps me maintain a balance and a rhythm. You know, and I probably more than most need a good hard slap once in a while. Might sound a bit odd, but just to wake you up to the things that surround you. Yeah.
Oh, Andy, it's been really interesting to talk to you. I think you've done so many interesting things, and thank you for sharing so much with us. Really, really fascinating.
Well,
I think
thank you for the opportunity.
It's been really a privilege. Just in closing, we're kind of, you know, heading towards June and hopefully the lifting of restrictions. What are you most looking forward to in the kind of second half of 2021?
Yeah, well, there's a quote that I included in my latest book. It's not one of my quotes, though. I just want to read it to you. So it's by a German philosopher called Arthur Schopenhauer. And he says, "It is loss which teaches us about the worth of things." And so for me, that's your question. It's, you know, we have all lost a lot, some a great deal more than others. I consider myself very fortunate. So what am I looking forward to? I'm looking forward to, I think, laughing more, to be in a group, to hug, to see my mum, actually, who I haven't seen in a long time, and hug her so hard that she can't speak. To hug my lovely sister and brother. But I think perhaps more importantly than that, I'm looking forward to seeing my son Louis's world open up, because I think for so many young people, it's been super tough, really hard. So I want to see them fly and thrive and live and learn to love life again, because I think it's been a tough season. So that's my hope. That's what I'm looking forward to.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think you've encapsulated lots of what we're all thinking, and you've put it into words so well.
You bet.
Yeah,
well,
brilliant.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So lovely to chat to you. I really appreciate your time that you've given us this afternoon. Great. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much. And thanks for all you do. God bless.
Pleasure. Bye.
See you.